Well then, looks like I'm going to be making a more art-centric video this time around. As you can see from my catalog of videos so far, I'm somewhat of a half-decent artist. As such, I put up a community post questioning if I should make a video like this, and the response was overwhelmingly in favor of Jeff the Peanut Butter, closely followed by yes. And in celebration of the butter, I'm marking that if I ever reach 20,000 subscribers, I'm going to be making a Jeff the Peanut Butter speed paint video and posting the full piece on my Twitter when it's done, because we can have nice things if we work hard enough for them. Now that that's out of the way, I suppose it's time for us to get into the nitty-gritty and get to talk shop. However, if some sections don't really interest you, I have some chapters marked for the sake of your viewing pleasure. Also, I have a Ko-Fi now, so if you want to throw money my way, then that's where to do it. Link in the description. Okay, back to the video. Bye! I'm just going to be preemptively answering this question before I get it asked. What hardware or software do you use? I use a Huion Canvas Pro 12 that I got many years ago on sale, although the canvas's display is showing the first signs of maybe possibly going out, but it's served me dutifully ever since high school, so use it I shall. Although there are definitely cheaper alternatives, I used a one by Wacom, not to be confused with the Wacom 1, because the one by Wacom doesn't have a display and is a lot cheaper. It was connected to my laptop via a micro USB plug rather than a USB plug and HDMI cable that my Huion uses. It worked well, but I think I like the drawing feel of my canvas a lot better, which is to be expected because one by Wacom is supposed to be like the Babby's first art tablet, but it's still a pretty respectable choice. Fun fact, before I got the canvas on sale, I was actually intending to get an XP Pen Artist 12 display tablet. I had my sights on it for the longest time, saving up and whatnot, but I eventually stuck with the canvas because I got it on sale and it was a lot cheaper. Now, if you're talking about hardware for making my videos, I use a budget gaming laptop and my microphone is a Sennheiser Profile. I thought that since I'd be doing YouTube, I'd go all out and invest in a pricier mic, because I think I heard Michael Kovac say in a Honeycast once that spending more on a pricier mic would be better in the long term, like an investment, and well, look how that turned out. It's weird because this microphone sometimes sounds good, and other times it sounds like it does in my Chainmail Chasers video, whatever. The audio being so bad is so weird to me, because I know this thing can make non-garbage audio as evidenced by my hiding video that nobody watched, but, whatever, I'm getting off track. What's your software? Well, back when I first started getting into art, I used the free art software Krita, using the default brushes because I didn't know how to import brushes, and the software's interface was pretty intimidating to someone who's never really seen one of these things before, and I worked with that for the first few years of digital art, which were pretty rough, and I spent some time fiddling around with different software like Ibis Paint X, but then I realized that painting with my finger would make my brain leak out of my ears, so shout out to all you crazy people that do that, by the way. Like Cup Toast, who not only apparently sounds like a squeaky toy that came to life, but also apparently animates with their finger on flip-a-clip, like, what? Wow. Ugh, anyways, I also tried dabbling in Autodesk and GIMP, but neither really stuck with me the same way that Krita did. The main artist that I tried learning from when I was in my Krita days was David Rivoy, or Rivoy? Not quite sure how to say that. But either way, an amazing artist that's got really good artistic learning content to go over. He certainly helped with getting used to the UI, because the thing is, if you haven't touched any kind of creative software before, the UI can be really intimidating to newbies. And up until then, the most I've encountered was the built-in Paint apps, and of course, MS Paint. I say that I never really got stuck with any one software before Krita, but actually even before Krita, I used Medibang. Yeah, I know, I said I'd use Krita first, but I'm a dirty liar. But the reason why I used Medibang was because I was inspired by the artist Clockbirds, and Medibang was the same application that they stuck to for the longest time before moving to Photoshop. Yucky, 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 yucky Adobe. Blah, barf, fucking gross. Anyways, I eventually switched to Clip Studio Paint because of its animation function and ease of downloading new brushes, including being able to import Photoshop brushes and a lot of that my favorite artists used, and so I purchased my Clip Studio license while it was on sale, which they do every now and then, and for editing, I use DaVinci Resolve. And now comes the main part of my video, 5 art tips from someone somewhat slightly above average in art skill. Just so you know, I'm primarily a digital artist. I did dabble in traditional before I was able to afford my tablet, but ever since then it's mostly just been digital central because I didn't have to spend more money on paint and stuff like that. So expect these tips to largely revolve around digital arts rather than traditional. Now with that out of the way, let's move forward. References. Yeah, of course. Use references. Everyone says that you have to use references when you're drawing. Of course, you can use them to give you a visual guide regarding certain parts of the body that you aren't familiar with, or just the things in general that you aren't very familiar with in your visual library, like certain plants and architecture or animals or whatever, right? However, the thing about references is that you should use your references mindfully. Try to gather them with some kind of intention behind your collecting. Alright, so what do I mean by this? Well, take for example, you use one reference so that you can study how some artist uses color choice. Maybe you like how this person makes their compositions, their choices in texture. Maybe you want to experiment with that type of art yourself, and so you grab it to essentially study it later. When you go for references, be sure to choose based not only if you think something's cool, and that is important part of it though, but based on if you want to take something very specific out of that piece and want to implement it into your own. Other people's art pieces or various reference images from places like image libraries can be a great place or a great sort of specialized guide when you want to get something very specific out of your own pieces. Do you have a specific pose in mind? Try looking for someone doing that pose. But what if that pose doesn't have the legs in the right place where you want them to be? Well, you should try looking for some reference images that give you an idea of how that leg should behave if placed in the pose that your other pose facilitates. Stuff like that. Try to mix and match, essentially, to create something brand new out of many different things, like picking and choosing in order to create something new. An example for me would have to be how I go about deciding how I color my characters. Specifically, like say my Sona, which is mostly a pitch black character while making it look interesting color-wise. And so, when I was still learning how to make my Sona how it does look, I tried to take some time to study the works of someone like True Noir, because this person creates lots of characters with pitch black bodies, with a very compelling way of going about coloring the body. It's extremely inspiring, at least to me. And this sort of thing leads into my next point. 2. Experimenting. Now that you have your inspirations, your references, or whatever in your mind or tucked away somewhere to use later, now is the time for you to start experimenting. Now, experimenting as an artist is something that can be daunting, since lots of artists tend to find this one thing that they're comfortable drawing, and they stay in that comfort zone. Be it people drawing similar furry characters, people drawing very similar anime characters, or just sticking to characters and never going about making environments for those characters to inhabit and preferring to just make a basic shape background in the pure white void. Hell, maybe they might not even stick to they might just stick to creating heads or busts and never moving on to the body. I've seen lots of artists that just stick to making really, really detailed heads and just struggling when making any kind of thing that's below the shoulder. You know? I know this, not only because I've seen it, because I was one of these people, you know? It's hard getting out of your comfort zone, but you gotta do it. So, when gathering inspirations, you can do it naturally, be it through reflecting on your own life, or maybe your interests. Don't be scared to explore a bit. A good resource that I'd like to use when I'm stuck on things like environments is gathering concept art from video games or aesthetics that I'm a fan of. Hyper Light Drifter, for an example, is an amazing world with a really amazing aesthetic for that world. There's also the background art of the show Steven Universe that's absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. Very striking. Take some time, explore, increase the size of your visual library, get familiar with using different things in different ways that you wouldn't really initially expect. Other good places to find good art for inspirations are of course places like Pinterest, so you can collect what you need to use for later. Although you might sometimes feel a bit stuck and not really able to get into the creative or experimental mind place. So a lot of the time, when it's time for me to make art, I often find myself very uptight about it. It's like this kind of perfectionist drive to make something special right off the bat, and it makes looking at a blank canvas quite intimidating for me. So, what do I do to counteract this? Well, I can't really go about experimenting like I should when I'm so worried about getting it right the first time. So, my solution was to find some kind of place where I can find myself and just let go of the stresses of analysis paralysis and indecision. Somewhere to just go wild or whatever. A lot of the times, artists say, oh, make a sketchbook or something like that. And, this is just a very long-winded way of saying that I use MS Paint and draw with my finger on a trackpad and mouse instead of a tablet. Sometimes I draw with my finger on my phone. I know it kind of sounds insane, but the thing about this approach is that my brain, mentally, disconnects from this idea that, oh, this thing that I'm making, it has to be good in the very beginning. It's a place where I can loosen up artistically and go wild without really needing to worry if what I make is good or garbage. Just the ideas, the designs, whatever, flowing right out of you. The shittiness or unwieldiness of the platform/medium takes my mind into a place where I can just explore in a more unrestricted manner, where I can just focus on the overall feel of what I'm making or going for rather than making it good or look good from the get-go, right? And so when I'm in a loose, experimental mood, an approach I go for is to use bits and pieces of references that I gather and design tropes that I like in order to piece together different designs. And this is the same process that I use to draft up the concepts for my paintings, using MS Paint as the way that I can storyboard or draft up compositions in a very free manner that's just really fast. Thumbnailing different ideas rapid fire without this weird thing in my brain that says that I have to spend way too long and put in too much effort on concepts that'll just be thrown away. I should just be churning out now, mass produce them, concept, just make them, and then take some parts that you like out of the visual garbage that you make, and then you take the parts that you like, and then you refine it later. So I take the bits and pieces of the different rapid fire pieces and I mix and match them to create a better version of what I'm going for. Only then do I actually boot up my preferred painting software and create a more refined piece. Tip number 3. Brushes. Get them. A very common sentiment among popular art YouTubers is this idea that you don't need fancy brushes in order to make fantastic art. And this is absolutely true. This is a true statement. You do not need fancy or textured brushes to make absolutely amazing art. However, using fancy brushes or being exposed to new ways of applying things like texture, color mixing, different palettes through color jitter, and things like that can be absolutely a really big help in getting your creative juices flowing. You can use the basic default brush. You can do that, and you can paint the Mona Lisa, or you can paint or whatever, or Rembrandt, whatever, but you don't necessarily need to dig a ditch with a teaspoon either. Different brushes can help. Hard-edged brushes, soft-edged brushes, color mixing, color jitter, smearing brushes, brushes with unique textures, brushes with unique shapes, brushes made out of the shitty JPEGs of the annoying orange's stupid fucking face, whatever. I know this because whenever I find myself caught up in art block, I use and experiment with different brushes and textures and I play around a bit. When I'm stuck on what colors that I should be using or something, I use color jitter brushes so I can experiment with different tones. It adds to my palette and it's really nice to have because when I'm stuck, the jitter tends to let me experiment with different colors that I wouldn't have otherwise. Just remember to be familiar with your fundamentals first, figure drawing, values, color theory, or whatever. Brushes are a tool to help you explore things in ways that you wouldn't otherwise have. And connecting my talk back about mindful uses of reference and experimentation, you can use your brushes as a way to experiment with your references, if you see that sort of effect in a piece that you like. Part 4. Learning through observation, or learning mindfully, or thinking constructively. Now that you've become familiar with properly using references and using those references to experiment, and having become familiar with complementing that by getting your creative juices flowing with some new brushes, let's move on to my biggest art tip. Let me ask you a question. What is the most important tool that you have in your artistic arsenal? Your brush? Artistic skill? Technical skill? Wrong. It's your eyes, and your brain specifically. It's what they let you do, observe things, and come to understand them. Observation and learning how to analyze your observations effectively is the most important skill that you can develop as an artist. After you've become familiar with the tools of your trade and the fundamentals like gesture, value, composition, color, etc., your accumulated art knowledge can be used effectively to try to understand the works of others. That way, when you're studying or trying to develop your skills through reference, through experimentation, through studies, you can begin to break things down on your own and attempt to come to understand the techniques and skills of those more experienced than you. I like to think of observation as treating art as if it were a puzzle, but one with many, many different solutions to achieve similar goals. By observing, you don't necessarily need to follow the exact same steps that it took the original artist or photographer or whatever to achieve the same effect. Allow me to provide an example in the form of a piece that I created. I'll try to break down the layer data for the video's thumbnail on screen now, and to illustrate what I mean for each part, I'm going to show off parts of the speed paint process that I'm going to put things into context. It may be a bit more on the advanced side, but I want you to try to speculate on how I tried to make the piece the way it is. Art pieces are like puzzles, where you can try to pick apart how you can think an artist achieved a certain effect, be it through layer manipulation or application of a certain technique. I'll give you some time to pause and try it out, but then I'll go over how I actually made it. When analyzing a piece, what I like to do is try to envision how I myself would go about organizing things like layers, since they allow me to add on a piece in a non-destructive way. Now, if you had a hard time trying to speculate, allow me to try to break it down so I can help you visualize what I mean. Now, I won't go into each specific layer and go into how I painted them because if I did that, we'd be here all day, since this took me like 6 to 7 hours of painting to do. After creating the sketch and the line work for this piece, I created a series of layer folders, each dedicated to different parts of the piece. There are folders for the background effects, the character itself, the line work, and effects in the foreground. Now, the folders for the background and its effects are pretty simple, just adding some color and helping with the composition to bring more attention to the bright yellow and orange pen that the character is holding. The most important folder would have to be Blanky Coloring, and it's that one that contains the bulk of the layer data for the character itself. This folder is further broken down into 4 parts, dedicated to the pen, the main body, and the hand. You may also notice that all of these folders have this red line next to them. This is Clip Studio Paint's way of showing that each folder is clipped onto the folder at the bottom, which I labeled Base Colors. The reason for this is so that all of the layer data inside of the folders marked in green would all be contained inside of the base color outline that I marked down in the red base color folder. Whenever I work inside of the green folders, any strike or brushstroke that I make would be confined to the outline marked in base colors. When I unclip the folders, you can see that the brushstrokes I made are all spilling outside of the line work. Now, you may have noticed that I have had the hand separated into 2 distinct folders separate from the rest of the character. This was because I wanted the ability to paint on the palm of the hand separately from the fingers and the knuckles without worrying about painting over the fingers while I was working on the palm of the hand. This way, I could work non-destructively to make the painting the palm more convenient. Not only that, but the placement of these folders on top of the main folder is because the hands are the closest to the foreground in this scene. If the main folder were to be on top of the hand folders, the coloring of the hand would have been covered up by the character's arm, or the bandana, or whatever. Now, a similar way of achieving this would be if you were to use the lasso select tool to outline the palm to be painted separately from the fingers all in one layer, but by separating the layers, I found it more convenient if I ever needed to go back to the palm finger divide and change something that I didn't like. You can see this same line of thinking when you open the Blanky main folder. Inside, you can see different folders dedicated to different parts of the character's body, with the folders representing parts that are supposed to be closer to the viewer being placed near the top of the folder hierarchy. The jacket and the arm are right under the hand, so that are closer to the viewer's sight, so it's placed near the top. Right under that is the bandana, under that is the shirt, and then inside of the jacket, which you can see next to the shirt. Then the head, and then the hat, since that is the thing that's supposed to be farthest away from the viewer's sight. Inside of each of those folders are even more layers that contain things like layers that add glow effects, layers where I painted over parts that I don't like, and some that I added to dedicate creating a rake brush effect. I won't go into these since the point of this video is more to get you familiar with thinking about how people's art processes work, rather than explicitly talking about how I render or create some form or composition. Maybe in the future, but right now I think I'm still shoddy at teaching, so maybe I might need some more experience with that first. Now, there may be times when you see a masterpiece or something that's completely out of your ability to even conceive of a way to break it down, and that's okay. That's natural, because your ability to observe requires time to develop. What I did to compensate is that I like to watch speed paints, especially from artists that I like, because when you're able to actually watch the process of how someone creates, you get to pick things up if you pay attention. When you see them do things that make you go, oh wow, take some time to rewind and rewatch and try to recreate what they did by speculating in your own head about how they went about what they did. Even better if you actually have a painting program open and try to replicate what they did for yourself. You may not be able to get it right, but you may be able to start to get an idea of what they're doing in your head. I have myself some favorites, people that I would like to watch to look at their processes. One is 13 Eastman, an artist with a mastery over color and form, next being Nicholas Cole, best known for being one of the main artists for Spyro Reignited and Crash Bandicoot 4, in addition to looking like you'd find him in a cozy fantasy shack. Just vibrant and playful coloring and amazing at design. If you're more interested in cartoony, vibrant coloring, then that's definitely someone you would want to look out for. Speaking of vibrant coloring, there's also the aforementioned Minja, who makes nothing but long paints, making masterpieces right before your eyes in the span of about 30 minutes to an hour. An absolute goldmine of studying right there. I could go on about the many artists that inspire me and the countless speed paints or processes video that you can check out to observe, but then we'd be here all day, so I suggest we move on. Part 5. Criticism and asking for help. One thing that really helps me whenever I'm struggling with a piece is that if I have someone to talk to about art, someone who knows what they're doing or is at least more familiar with the territory than I am. Now, this may not be for the faint of heart or most artists, because this step requires you to, yes, and hear me out here, actually talk to other artists, preferably those who are more technically skilled than you are, in order to get some good feedback on how to improve your work so you can create a better piece. Of course, just make sure that they're okay with it. And okay, I know that sounds bad, because I know for a fact that most people who are artists are hyper-socially anxious people who can barely start up a conversation with the cashier without their brain melting out of their ears, and it pools out all over the cash register, and then the rats hiding in the walls all come out crawling and start slurping up your head juices, and then there's someone in the food court giving you a dirty look, like seriously right in front of my food, and it's just a whole thing. Okay. Point is, if you want to go down this route, just be prepared for the dreaded social interaction. But who knows? Maybe you might get a friend out of it. Now, the reason why I suggest that you try to ask someone skilled is because while less experienced artists or non-artists can definitely tell you something's wrong with a piece, they may not necessarily be able to specifically articulate exactly what is wrong with something. They won't really be able to tell you that your values are off, despite being able to feel the mistake by looking at the piece. Some might even try to give feedback in one way, but actually provide a suggestion that may not actually resolve the main issue that your piece has. Like, for example, your piece is missing bounce light in your shadows, but this person may not know the way that light behaves, and the technical terms that artists use like subsurface scattering, bounce light, or whatever. Even if they do, they may not have a good way to fix the problem. They are a good way to get a general idea of what you're getting wrong, but it's better to get someone more experienced under the hood. An example of this was when I was making the thumbnail for my Graveyard Shift at Freddy's video. I was stuck for the longest time on the lighting for the head of Bonnie, which you can see here. This is the beta version. It's not horrible, but you can tell that there's something off about it that I really couldn't place a finger on as to why it's not clicking. Then, since I was out of ideas and even flipping the canvas wouldn't work for me, I reached out to an artist that I shared a Discord server with that I was on relatively good terms with. They gave me some pointers of criticism about my piece, specifically the lighting placed on the head. They pointed out that the light source was supposedly coming from the bottom right of the piece, right in front of Bonnie, and the directions of my shadows and the placement of my lighting didn't really reflect what I was going for, so my lighting situation was completely inconsistent with what I wanted. Then, they provided me with some images that outlined what was going wrong with my lighting methods, even suggesting some places where I should place my lights and shadows for a better composition. And that's how I finally got out of my own headspace. I decided to completely scrap the lighting situation I had created thus far and worked out a monochrome redraft, which I then painted over to create the current iteration that you can see as the thumbnail today. It's just to show that even when you're pretty experienced with your art, you're never above asking for help or criticism whenever you're struggling. If I never asked for assistance, it would likely have taken me much longer or had me completely scrap the piece and start over, because I have a bad habit of doing that, to get a grasp on what I wanted out of the lighting. It was also an incredibly good learning experience for my approach to lighting. By being given this problem, struggling with it, and being shown some clues to a good solution to that problem, not only was I able to create a much better piece, but the lesson imparted upon me from that experience would have a lot more staying power as a lesson in my head. TLDW, criticism is epic. Just make sure to be mindful when you're asking. In my previous example, I asked for something very specific. What's wrong with my shadow placement or my lighting placement? What I did not say or do was just be really vague, like what's wrong with this piece, or roast me, or whatever, and be super vague, because, then the artist wouldn't have really any kind of direction as to go with what's wrong with the thing. And be sure to keep in mind that this is you asking for help, okay? Be courteous, be thankful, and show appreciation, basic etiquette stuff. This is people taking their time out of their day to teach you something. If they don't want to, then that's fine. Just say, thank you for your time, and move on, alright? No need to get catty, we're all friends here, it's fine. Anyways, this has been 5 art tips and tricks with Blanky. I'm gonna go eat glue now. Bye!
Are you being intentionally dense?
La do 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 la do 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 do